To be, to become, to begin, where the river leans to the sea. To learn, to let go, to love. The world turns endless, turning me. Oh.
Okay, here we go with another explorative one. You're in the process of writing an essay, and we're gonna revolve or move around the thinking of your current thinking around that. And the general topic is life and death. It couldn't be bigger than that, really. I have a whole bunch of thoughts myself, but before we go there, I'd love to hear where your thinking is at with the preparation for the essay.
Okay. So I actually do think of it as quite distinctly two stories, right? The life story and the death story. The life
Mhm.
story being the longer of the two, which, life is, in my view, uh, a branch on the tree of emergence that started back with the Big Bang. And first we got
Mhm.
particles, and then we got molecules, and then we, under gravitational attraction, got stars, and stars went through generations. And this is very important. This part of it people often miss is that the heavier elements, things heavier than helium, hydrogen, and a teeny bit of lithium, were created in the late stages of stars. Supergiants
Mhm.
produce some heavy metals. Supernovas produce more, and so the building blocks for life were generated in stars over multiple generations. It's thought that the sun is about a fourth generation star, maybe a third, maybe a fourth, in that it came relatively late in the day. The sun is maybe 5 billion years old from a universe that's 13.8 billion years old. And the bigger stars that generate these advanced elements tend to be rather short-lived, some of them only a few 100 million years. So it's not at all impossible that we could be a fourth generation star. And the cross section of elements and their concentrations in the sun seem to indicate third or fourth generation. And of course, it's not as clean as that, because the ejecta from the big stars gets all mixed up in the dust clouds and such. And so we have all kinds of
Mhm.
interesting things. And there's a subset there's a set of them that are necessary for at least the kind of life that we are, including some odd ones. Something that's in all life, all Earth life, is molybdenum, which is something you're not going to find floating around out in interstellar space, at least
Okay.
not until a star gets big enough to do some creation of new elements and firing out there. And literally, human life or any life on Earth that we know of, the descendants of Luca, our last universal common ancestor, all require molybdenum, and they require a bunch of other odd trace elements. And
Mhm.
so the universe had to physically evolve for a long time before we had the prerequisites for at least our style of life. Whether that is probably common, that throughout the galaxy and throughout the universe, over billions of years, a concentration of these trace elements has built up, sufficient for at least our kind of life and maybe for other kinds of life. But in any case, in our particular neighborhood, enough of these things had been created in previous generations that the Earth had a fairly decent concentration of them, enough for life. You don't need a lot, just need a teeny bit of these trace elements, but you do need some of them. The life then came together on Earth. And what does that even mean? To my mind, it means metabolism, information processing, and protection. Uh, Membranes.
Mhm.
Early pre-life was probably chemicals in a pond or near a black smoker underwater vent, or deep in the earth, that was not contained in a membrane, and it would start to get a little bit more complex. Then it'd be dispersed by something that happened, a water current came by or something. And so it didn't get very far. Probably relatively early in the process, the concept of a membrane formed, and it turns out there are some chemicals, fatty acids, that you put them in water and they react with the water so as to produce a membrane where the inside of the membrane has one pole of the fatty acid and the outside has another. It's not a very smart membrane, but it's enough to allow concentrations of chemicals to occur. So then next, probably, people argue about this, so don't take this for gospel. I have done quite a few podcasts on origin of life, so go listen to those for alternative stories. The metabolism started to occur, which is the ability to make new molecules out of old molecules, in particular, to take smaller molecules and stitch them together and make bigger molecules out of them. And things would come in through the membrane and then would hit the metabolism, which was a series of cycles that continue inside the membrane, and then produce energy, produce building material, etc. And then, but those weren't too long lasting either. They'd pop after a while, or they get the balance would get to be wrong, and there wasn't enough information to constantly be reinventing and holding the thing together coherently. So somewhere along the line, information processing molecules were created by the metabolism. One theory says it was RNA first. Others say DNA came first. Some say both were needed together. And the interesting things about both of those is they can transfer information. RNA typically is used for transferring information within a cell. DNA is also does some of that, but probably more importantly, creates not really the template, but creates the, and it's not really instructions, but it's a series of chemical moves that it makes that allows the emergence of a life form. That tells how to make the chemicals that are the membrane. That tells how to make the chemicals that are the metabolism. And while the RNA is involved in spreading that word around the cell. And somehow it all came to a sufficient level of efficacy that life ignited, right? And probably there was lots of proto-life that evolution tried to build. It would build membranes with information, but not metabolism, or the membrane wasn't good enough, or the information processing wasn't good enough, or the membrane wasn't effective enough, didn't produce all the pieces that needed. But somewhere along the line, probably about 4 billion years ago, a sufficient ensemble of life came together and fired in a solid fashion. And life, our chain of life, began. And somewhere not too far after the beginning of life, maybe a couple 100 million years, we find the last universal common ancestor to us, meaning that all life on Earth, fungus, trees, paramecium, frogs, elephants, and us, are all descended from a single organism about 3.7 billion years ago, probably, which is really quite remarkable when you think about it, that none of these other competing forms of life has left any descendants. We don't quite know when they died out, but we do know that everything that exists today descended from a single organism quite a long while ago. And of course, when it reached that sufficiency, it has the ability to, basically divide and grow. And then later, sexual reproduction was invented in the animal strings, and more information processing could go on and could be selected for via Darwinian evolution, and cells and life got smarter and smarter, intelligent. Intelligence meaning make good decisions in your environment. And this is very important. It means nothing about consciousness, at least in my view. Something can be very intelligent and have no consciousness whatsoever, and something can have consciousness, not that much intelligence. An example of something with high intelligence and no consciousness would be a Waymo, a self-driving car. It's amazing the amount of processing it's doing. It's amazing the amount of mechanical things it can do by information processing. But there's no reason to believe at all that there's any consciousness at all in a Waymo or in a chess program, which, smarter than the smartest human in chess, but, again, no reason at all to believe there's any consciousness in that. So then we have these ever increasing efficacies of different kinds of life. And then in a big breakthrough around 550 million years ago, so-called Cambrian explosion, the kind of multicellularity that we know that humans have many different kinds of cells, and we're basically built from cells, which are tiny, most of them microscopic. And this breakthrough allowed the emergence of animals. And animals tend to be, though they aren't always, mobile. Many of them are predators. And the life of a predator or prey in a world with predators requires higher intelligence to survive as either a predator or a prey. And the neuron was evolved just a little before the Cambrian explosion, probably not a coincidence. And so the arms race in the animal world produced brains, and initially very tiny ones. C. elegans, which is the kind of worm that's studied by biochemists, etc., has, I think it's 304 neurons, exactly 304. And we actually know how they're connected and everything else. That was not the most primitive of animals, but it was pretty primitive. And so, a brain of 304 neurons, not very big, consider we have billions of neurons in our heads, and even mice have hundreds of millions. Over time, there was an arms race for bigger and bigger brains, and also better tuned brains to do things in the world. Vision came around several times. There's been multiple evolutions of vision in the animal kingdom, which are not directly related to each other. For instance, spiders have a certain kind of eye, and octopus have certain kinds of eyes, and mammals have basically the same eye. And so there was all this elaboration, which was highly accelerated by the Cambrian explosion and the invention, basically, of prey and predator, which accelerated the pace of the arms race and eventually led to things that we'd recognize as higher level animals, things like amphibians, fish, amphibians being like a toad or a frog, and then reptiles came from amphibians, and then we came from reptiles, more or less, and kept evolving, building more efficacious brains and bigger brains until somewhere along the line, consciousness emerged. We're not sure where. Some people would say it goes back to fish. Some people would say amphibians. Some people say, I would say, can't be any further back than reptiles, in that it appears that both mammals and birds have consciousness. And the last common ancestor of birds and mammals was lizards or proto-lizards. So let's say something like consciousness, an early version of consciousness, emerged sometime 200 million years ago, maybe a little longer, at around the spot that was the common ancestor of both birds, mammals, and things like dinosaurs. So we were all developing components of consciousness, which of course says that maybe dinosaurs were conscious. Hard to say. We don't know. So that was the next step in the evolution of life. And consciousness must have brought some substantial capacity to the animals who developed it, because it's expensive. It's expensive in two ways. First, life is always about return on investment of energy. And consciousness requires a fair bit of energy to operate. And further, genetic information is sparse and rare, and the body or evolution has to allocate DNA, etc., for various purposes, making your heart beat, making your bones grow, etc. And a considerable amount of genetic space is allocated to the things that result in consciousness, at least so it appears. And since it's both energetically expensive and genetically expensive, consciousness has to be adding considerable value to the animals that developed it. I would suggest that some likely candidates are learning particularly learning in context. For instance, creating episodic memories that include the context as well as the perception, as well as the action taken and the reward gotten. So it's a considerably more richer form of memory than, for instance, a microorganism that learns. If I turn right, I get sugar. If I turn left, I don't. And after a while, it'll learn to turn right. But in a very unsophisticated, simplistic way, the kind of learning that comes with consciousness is quite a bit more powerful, even for things like C. elegans that we talked about earlier. They can learn quite a bit more than a microorganism similar size that does not have something vaguely like consciousness. And then once we got to the larger mammals with true consciousness, I'm going to retract that. C. elegans probably not, almost certainly not conscious. But again, people argue about that. Some people think rocks are conscious, but I don't. So then you get to, let's go up the mammal chain, and all of them are probably conscious. And that consciousness gets more and more powerful. Chimps have pretty amazing consciousness. They have social systems. They have the use of tools, use of gestures, quite complex hierarchical society, etc. All of it mediated by conscious nervous systems. And then finally, we get the good old humans, post chimps. And we have all the tools, most of the tools that chimps have. Chimps are smarter than us in some ways. Their reaction times are better. Their visual memory is probably a bit better. We should not think of ourselves as the pinnacle of evolution, just the latest, one of the latest stages of evolution. In fact, us and chimps are both at the end tip of the tree of evolution. We have gone to different places under different selection pressures. But the thing we added that's really makes our consciousness and our form of life different is language. Probably first symbols, so that you don't have to, essentially, hold up a picture of an elk or something. You just create the word elk and then reference it that way. And then over time, language develops some specific technologies like recursion, like grammar, etc., which allowed us to express quite sophisticated things, early stories, etc. And when we think of ourselves and our lives, I would say that we generally think of our consciousness. When we're asleep or in a coma or in under general anesthesia, for all intensive purposes, us is gone, right? And then you wake up and, oh, I'm back again, right? It's very interesting. And I think that's one of the things that people don't pay enough attention to about consciousness, is that it comes and it goes. So in my worldview episodes, I always start off with, hey, guess you woke up this morning. What is that? Who is this person, right? And it's really quite interesting. And so, that kind of gets us up to today, where we have pretty advanced consciousness, not the most possible, powerful, imaginable consciousness, but we have a pretty interesting, pretty efficacious one. So now let's switch directions. We got advanced life here. What is death? Right? All life, even back to the microorganisms, the earliest ones, involves cycles where things happen in a directed graph, essentially, to continually recreate oneself. You need, the chemicals get consumed, they get broken down, they get polluted. So you need some form of continuous process to create the chemicals that you need for life. When we get to more advanced animals like mammals, things like your musculature is being reinvented. The skin, everything, a human, as I understand, it's about, at most, your cells last a year. So all your cells in your body, with the exception of your neurons, are replaced about once a year. And so there has to be a process, cycles, that recreate those things and keep them in balance, right? If your body just started producing bone cells before long, you'd be all bone. That wouldn't be too good. So there has to be cycles and regulation to produce the new cells in their approximate right balances and that they go to the right place, etc. And the generic term for these cycles is homeostasis. These cycles not only do their cycle thing and use energy and raw materials to make things, but they also do so continuously and reinforce themselves. That's the interesting thing, right? That the nervous system, amongst other things, drives the lungs and the heart, and the lungs and the heart together make sure that oxygen gets into the blood, and then the blood cycle goes to the neuron, and the neuron stays alive. If the neuron does not get oxygen for a few seconds, it will stop functioning, and if you deprive it of oxygen for 5 minutes, it dies. And if these homeostatic cycles fail, death is the inevitable result. At different speeds, the heart and lungs, in the minutes range, digestive system in the weeks range, water system in the days range. But all of them are necessary. If any of them fail, you will eventually go from the scene. And ones that impact the neurons, particularly in a widespread ways, will destroy your consciousness. There are some critical components of the neural system, one of them in the brain stem, back in the old ancient reptile brain. If that goes, you're not conscious. You're done. At least you're not experiencing anything. The thalamus, which is a piece of the midbrain, if that becomes damaged or dies, you are no longer conscious, period. There are parts of the cortex, you can lose a fair bit of the cortex and still be conscious, but there are certain areas of the cortex, but if you lose too much of it, then again, you will lose consciousness. And if you lose enough and it all dies, then you won't come back. So your consciousness, which is you, which is the real you, I would argue, other people disagree with that, but that's all right, is gone. And so when we come to death, what is it? Death is when your homeostatic cycles stop working at a rate sufficient to keep themselves working. Because keep in mind, they're cycles. They always have to operate continuously as cycles. And when enough of those homeostatic cycles die, particularly the oxygen one, then you die. Your consciousness dissipates. Game over. And that's all she wrote, people. When the homeostatic networks break down, you are now a bag of chemicals. Sorry about that, folks. And in a natural state, you'll get eaten by somebody, or you're to the degree that you're not quickly eaten, then funguses and microorganisms and insects will chew you up and recycle your chemistry into the ecosystem. In fact, I've given instructions to my family that bury me in a linen bag, right, so that the process can happen quickly, and my chemistry gets returned to the earth. And that, as far as I'm concerned, will be the end of the story.
All right. I have one big question, but I'm gonna frame it a little bit. The whole story of life that you described is carbon-based life, right?
And we'll say it's our life. It's the story of our life.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
There could be other forms of life.
It requires a third or fourth generation star because it requires certain heavy elements that can only be produced by stars of a certain generation or age. And it's not very probable, but also not impossible to imagine sulfur-based life, meaning there could have been life when the first stars started emerging, right, already, because the essential building blocks were around. They were just too distributed, and sulfur could have served as a base, not as versatile and solid as carbon, but could have served as a base.
And our life, by the way, requires sulfur and a fair bit of it. It's one of the it's one of the more important trace elements. In fact, I think it's beyond a trace element in Luca life. Whether you could actually does sulfur have enough options in binding? I don't know. I never thought about it, but it's possible.
It's one of the few that has enough options of binding. It's just too long, too brittle. So it's not as versatile as carbon. But anyway, so the there could be multiple versions of life out there. There's traces of potential life on Mars, whether it came from here or is a general function of the universe, who knows?
Or ours
And
came
then,
from there. I think there's a fair
or
chance
ours
of
came from
that.
there, right? Also that. There's many ifs here, right? So that original soup. Did it create a membrane, or did the membranes come from somewhere else, right? What came first, RNA or DNA? All of those super big ifs make this an interesting, very interesting endeavor to think about. Where does it come from? What does it? But it also shows me that there will never be any certainty, or likely there will be never any certainty around how did this whole thing evolve that we call life and that we experience, right?
Yeah, yeah, there
So
are though some interesting clues coming, right?
of
When
course,
we
yeah.
when we get to Mars, if we find remnants of life that are not our life, that is very interesting, right? That
Hmm.
tells us that life is probably pretty common. Simple life, at least, is pretty common in the universe, and that our life is indeed unique and not part of a one of the terms is used as panspermia, where somehow life got seeded across the universe, probably by an older civilization, and that we are a descendant of that dispersal of life across the universe. Of course, it still begs the question: where did that guy's life come from?
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
So you don't get rid of that problem of the
exactly.
origin; you
Yeah,
just push it
never,
back,
never. Yeah.
maybe a couple of billion years. And
So
the
and
other
then,
one is
mm,
Enceladus, the Mars of Saturn, which looks maybe promising for life. It's got a water ocean beneath the
mhm,
surface. It's probably got it has a rock core, so it has sources of these elements, including trace elements, etc. And So if we find life there, and the other one we're doing is we're looking at the atmospheres of planets of other stars, and we're getting close to the ability to determine the constituents of the atmospheres. And of course, doing some experiments in labs on Earth, we can determine if certain signatures could only be caused by life, or could they
mhm.
be, or is there a biological process? Now, so far, it's turned out to be a difficult problem because they've found chemical ways to produce different atmospheric signatures, but we may find one that's unambiguously a sign of life elsewhere in the universe.
Mhm.
And
But we agree that it's a huge question, right? And it
yes, yes.
likely never be answered. And then the flip side, you pull the experience of life into consciousness, into one symptom of life, really, right? Because it's life is much more than consciousness. And also there, we don't know if we're really the pinnacle. Maybe the octopus are, or whales. Whales have names, right? So they are conscious. They must be conscious if they have names. So maybe they have other symbols they use that we don't yet understand or will never understand. And then death is what happens when consciousness collapses and disappears, and therefore your experience of what it means to be alive disappears. So to me, that brings up the question, why? Why even think about where does life come from? What does it give you that to think this question, and also the death question? What's the underlying reason for you to explore this?
I'll do the death one first because that's easy, right? If you
Hmm.
look at human history, a huge amount of human history has been driven by fear of death, right?
Hmm.
Think about the religions. I'm of the age that I go to a fair number of Christian funerals these days, 2 or 3 a year. And it's clear to me, at least, that what that religion is selling is, oh, Mary, you're going to see Mary again in a few years in heaven, right? And see all your
Hmm.
friends and all that stuff. Okay, people, fairly obvious what this is all about. You're preying on people's fear of death and fear of the
Hmm.
end, etc. or possibly going to hell, etc. And to my mind, if one thinks about what death actually is just the stopping of homeostasis cycles, and then the breakdown of your chemistry into simpler chemistry as it gets reabsorbed into the biosphere. Nothing to fear about death. It's just a thing. It's a natural process, inevitable in higher life, like mammals. In fact, they're probably programmed not to live forever for good reason. And so I think it's important to at least think about death so as not to over-index on it. You know, death is coming for you, guarantee it, folks, right? And it is, I think, easily understood and not particularly scary. And so that's why I think at least thinking a little bit about death is important, and don't follow rabbit holes of ridiculous stories. You know, see what you can actually find out about life and death. And I think it's an easy way to avoid, fear and being, upset about the idea. You go, you're going to die. Oh, well, right? Now, the life story, I think, is more interesting. I recently wrote a Substack essay. I think it was like my second one back that talked about the change in how we have to think about existential risk with respect to whether life is widespread or not, particularly if technological life is well spread or not, which is what the SETI search for extraterrestrial intelligence is looking for. And the reason I say this, I say it in 15 pages. If you're interested, go to my Substack, jimrutt.substack.com, and read the one about Fermi principle and existential risk. So in that one, I argue that even life at our level, which is, we're on our way, but we're by no means a superpower yet, provides considerable opportunity for the universe to come to life. You give if humans don't destroy themselves or knock themselves back from technological capacity, within 10,000 years, we'll be sending probes out to the universe. We'll be continually monitoring, looking for communications, and we may find that there's already a galactic civilization out there, which we can join up and learn some things and contribute some things. Or we may be alone in the universe. When I was a 14-year-old nerd, I would have never believed that we were alone. Hey, what about all science fiction stories? What about all them people on planets out there? What about all those space wars, right? But since then, I've spent a fair amount of time searching on this topic. There's a really good book called Where is Everybody? And it lays out 75 different arguments why either they're out there, we can't see them, or they're not out there at all. And the case for not out there at all is stronger than you might think. I talked about all these steps to reach consciousness. It may turn out some of them are extremely difficult. The origin of life itself might be extremely difficult. The big cells that formed along the way, called the eukaryote cells, without those, you're not going to get our kind of life, human life. Maybe that one is extremely difficult. Maybe neurons was extremely difficult. There's a whole bunch of ways that technologically capable life might be so difficult that it happened only once in the whole universe, or maybe it happened once in the galaxy. Other galaxies are so far away, it has less impact on our galaxy. And the risk of not having the capacity to bring the universe to life is a gigantic moral hazard, moral risk. If it turns out there are 10,000 technologically capable civilizations in our galaxy, if we kill ourselves off, well, it's a shame for us. It doesn't really impact the cosmic trajectory of the universe. But if we're the only one, if we're the only technologically capable species in the universe, to go to the most extreme case, then if we kill ourselves off, then we have made the ability of the universe to know itself, to grow in complexity more or less in an open-ended fashion. Basically, the universe loses all that. And until we know the answer, we have to be extra careful, is what I would say.
But isn't that a scaling up of the fear of death? So if you say Well, death is nothing but the consciousness going away, and the cells and the atoms being recycled into the next generation of life. Then you could argue the same about this instance here, right? The actual this instance being this planet with this kind of life on it. The it it's the argument of making ourselves the seed of life in the universe then turns into a religious argument, really, right? Instead of saying, oh, let's just let it happen and see where this takes us on this planet. So why would we bother?
Yeah, I have a values judgment on this, which is that
Hmm.
life is more interesting than non-life.
Okay.
That the degrees of freedom of life in terms of solving problems, creating stuff, making art, having sex, having emotions is just fundamentally more interesting than a universe of rocks that just sit there. And
Hmm.
hence, it would be a damn shame to not bring the benefit of life to the universe. That's basically it right there.
Hmm. Okay. And what about your own? So the you could give the exact same argument for trying to prolong or extend or protect um, your a human's individual's life, right? So it's more
And
fun to
most
be
of us,
conscious than not to be conscious.
yep, that seems to be the case. And most humans do, right? We avoid walking in front of buses. We uh, don't drink to gross excess, at least once we're 25. We're careful with guns. We
Hmm.
do, we go to the doctor when we're sick. So, I think that most non mentally ill humans do take considerable effort into extend their life as long as they can. But for historical reasons, evolutionary reasons, at least so far, the ability to extend our lives is limited to maybe 100 years, 110 years. Now that will no doubt be pushed forward by better medical technology and such, and could possibly be pushed very far forward by things like brain uploading. And people will be interested in those. Some will, some won't. So I do think, as individuals, we tend to uh, to prudently act to extend our lives, at least as long as our lives are productive and enjoyable and worth living.
Hmm. So that means that it's not as easy as you earlier proposed. That well, it's just it. Consciousness switches off, and that's it, because nobody wants their consciousness to be switched off, right? And not unless you go to sleep at night and you switch it off for a couple of hours and you come back and you know you will come back or you hope you will come back. Um,
Usually
but
you come back. Yeah.
usually come back. Many thousands of times you usually come back and then we don't. So the it isn't that easy, right? The same argument that you made for the value argument that you made for the whole set of human life to bring that into the universe applies for the individual still, right?
Actually, it's an interesting connection here. I think closer is the argument if the universe is full of intelligence versus if it only has one. If I was the only person uh, in the universe and there will be no others, and if the universe is going to be aware of itself, it has to be me, then the moral value of somehow figuring out for me to live forever is of the same order. If it turns out we're the only
Hmm.
species that we don't kill ourselves off, but I'm not the only human, and if I die, yes, it modifies the human story a teeny bit, but not a lot. So, no particular reason for those of us who live amongst species with many members in it. The significance of our life is not zero by any means, but it is not
Hmm.
huge with respect to the cosmic unfolding of the universe.
Okay, so essentially you're saying because we see the next fractal of life of human life beyond myself, but a society and then a whole civilization and a species were okay to die at one point because we know that the story is continuing and some of ourselves is also continuing in that story because we contributed in some form, and that gives us peace of mind.
Yes. And in
That's
fact, the second
roughly.
part you just said there is hugely important,
Mhm.
I think. People say, oh, I want to go to heaven, blah, blah, and sit around and sing dumbass songs on a cloud. I don't think so. But the fact that when we work here on earth and that we leave some legacy behind of new ideas, of good examples of how to be a parent or whatever it is, that's really our mission here on earth, is to contribute to the ongoing unfolding of the species.
Okay, so and then it is important for a human, individual human, to not run in front of the bus, to prematurely switch off our consciousness. Um, why do we seem to be absolutely incapable of doing the same at a collective level? Is it possible that we're one of the dead ends of life in the universe? So we're just too stupid to survive beyond this planet? Or are we in in an evolution in which we start being able to prevent collective suicide?
Well, that's, of course, the question of the day, right? Uh, Prior to 1945, we didn't really have the means to do meaningful damage to our worldwide um, civilization. But once we developed the atomic bomb, then the hydrogen bomb, and then biological warfare, etc., the means to potentially kill off at least a very large percentage of our population became real, and we have new existential risks like forever chemicals, like runaway AIs. There's plenty of other possibilities that may not kill every human, but can knock our civilization back so far it could never recover. For instance, a EMP war where countries fry each other's grids, probably 90% of humanity dies. And one of the things to remember, this is something to remember, I haven't talked about this in a long time, is that the second rise of technological civilization will be a lot harder than the first, because we have depleted all the easily accessible ores and fuels and things of that sort. You have to be able to drill like 10,000 feet to find oil these days, when in 1862 or whatever it was in Pennsylvania, I think the first oil well was like 90 feet deep.
Mm.
So if we get knocked back to Stone Age, it literally will be a lot harder for us to climb the stack the second time. Though we may find knowledge if there's enough left and not too much time has gone by, but the resources will be much harder. So as to the question of whether we should disappear, I think we are okay. Yes, it's perfectly reasonable to think of life on Earth as just one of the buds at the end of the tree of emergence, and
Mm.
what's its significance? I would come back and say again, it depends on whether we're the only one or not. If we're the only one, then the importance is gigantic. If there's many, much less important, but still not unimportant. And therefore, not killing ourselves, at least until we know if there's others out there, is a very high moral requirement.
Why is it important to the universe?
There's no external reason for it. I would suggest it's an endogenous reason. Fundamentally, life is more interesting in non-life, and for the ability for the universe to know itself and to become the home for life is interesting and good in and of itself. It's exploring the story more deeply.
Mm.
Otherwise, it's a bunch of rocks sitting out there for the next trillion years or so. To have life be part of that unfolding just strikes me as way more interesting.
How much does death inform or has death informed your life?
Yeah, I think I've always been a person, at least since I've been 11, that had a very similar view on death as the one I just gave.
Mm,
And essentially, what it provides is a bit of a sense of urgency, right? It
mhm,
says, all right, you only got so many years, and then you're gone, and that's probably the end of the story. So if you're going to do something in any sphere, whether it's just be a good person, whether it's reclaim an old farm, whether it's having uh, a great family life, etc. You only have only a certain number of years, and not that many good years. Now that somebody's getting old, there are a lot of things I can't do that I used to be able to do. So get on with it, people, uh, and do what you want to do or what you can do to contribute to the goodness of our planet while you can. The other
mhm,
thing that's done for me is I haven't spent any time at all worrying about death and what comes after death. Long ago, I just thought, all right, the answer is when you're dead, you're a dead peckerhead. And so don't worry about it. And we do know many humans spend vast amounts of time worrying about that topic. And so
mhm,
I've never spent any time worrying about that topic, at least once I came to that conclusion.
mhm. I haven't had a near-death experience in a classic sense. I was in some situations where it was a very, very close shave, but nothing like out-of-body experiences or anything like that. So where there was actual danger, or yeah, there was actual danger, but not anyway. Um, there's a very interesting uh, thing that I have um, noticed where the moments where I feel most complete and full of joy about life and full of life are also the moments where it would be most okay to die at the same time. I'm wondering whether that is something you also have experienced, and what would you make of that if you have?
Hmm, that's an interesting question. I'm not sure I've ever had that experience because I always think that there's new cool things to do. I've never
Yeah,
done
of course.
anything that's so cool. I go, okay, now I can just shut it down and be happy, right? I'm not all that teleological. Uh, I just go out and do stuff, right?
Hmm.
And none of them have been significant enough. Saying, "Oh, I have reached my life's potential." Blah blah. Time to check out. Bye.
No,
Uh,
that's not the feeling. So there's always some next step, of course,
right,
right? But
right.
there will always be some next step. There will
Yeah,
always be something next to experience to that your consciousness wants to go to.
yeah.
But but it's a different kind of there's a certain satisfaction, a certain clarity about the it's, in a way still, despite the fact that there is more to explore and more to do and more to experience. um, it's a okay, job complete situations, job complete feeling, and then everything after that is kind of optional. And the first time I've had that, I was around 20, and I've had several of those across my life. And I cannot plan for them. They just happen from time to time. And it's
Yeah, I
very,
can't say
very
I've
interesting and very liberating.
interesting. Yeah, I can't say I've ever had that explicit feeling.
Mm.
Well, I guess the closest I had to that is when my daughter got married. And I go,
Mhm.
okay, she's launched. She's married to a nice guy. She's got a career,
Mm,
job
mm,
complete on being a parent. Not, of course,
mhm,
there's still
mhm.
other things to do as a parent, but the biggest part, getting the kid alive and in good state to
Mm,
23 or 24 and married off to a good guy with a decent career. All right,
yeah.
job done on that
Mhm,
front.
mhm,
But it wasn't a powerful feeling, particularly. It didn't change my trajectory any, at least that I noticed. So yeah, no, I haven't really felt that much of that particular one.
mhm. So putting out one trajectory that we didn't really explore yet was the um, being part of the greater whole. right? Which gives us the permission to let go of our consciousness because we're part of the whole species. But we're only part of it really if we provide into that, right? You just pointed towards your daughter and said, okay, you actually created more life with your life. And you can now see this in even one generation further. So job done twice over, basically. But you're also doing all sorts of other things. Are these also part of the contribution to the greater good? And if so, what is the thing that you hope to see grow out of that?
Yeah, I think everything I do, well, not everything. There's certainly some pure hedonistic things I do, but like riding on a roller coaster or eating a corn dog. But the professional things and semi-professional things I do, particularly once I retired from business, they're all about helping the world be better. Whether I'm mentoring a young business person, or whether I'm working on the Game B story, or whether I'm writing what I think at least are interesting essays for my Substack, whether I'm just having chats with smart folks like this one. I'm trying to add something of value to the world. And but am I going, oh my God, gotta add this thing to the world, or my life will be a waste? I go, nah. I just try to add value to the world where I can when the opportunity presents itself. But I don't feel maniacally driven to do that. I do it as I live in the world.
Mm-hmm.
But it is certainly something I pay attention to.
And that's essentially the tension between meaning in life and meaning of life, right? So meaning of life, no clue, which forces us to have meaning in life, because without that, there's no real purpose to be alive. And on an individual level, we manage to do that. We manage to contribute. And what I'm hearing is that the idea of the intergalactic species is giving humanity meaning in its existence.
Yes, that gives it a reason. It gives it a direction. We talk about, I said, no telos, but this, at least very roughly, is a direction that seems to be open-ended for at least a trillion years. That, hey, there's something for humanity to do for the next trillion years. And that's interesting, probably. And we don't know how, and it took a lot of things to explore, a lot of things to learn. If we especially run into other civilizations, lots of things to share. It's just open-endedly more interesting, and more ways to contribute to the structure of it all. Yeah.
And life structures, right? Life is in a way it produces a lot of entropy by creating structures, right? Could it be an inherent force of the nature of the universe itself in that? Is it built into the fabric?
I think it practically is. Prigozhin and his theory of dissipative systems is that the universe has a tendency to want to burn up energy. And it turns out that complex biological systems burn energy quite efficiently, in the same way that a whirlpool in your bathtub actually drains the bathtub faster than it going gurgle, gurgle, gurgle. And so that's the reason, and how, I shouldn't say the reason, but it is how the whirlpool in the bathtub forms. It's a faster way to dissipate energy. People don't know this, but a human is, I think it's like 100,000 times the heat dissipation per unit of weight that compared to a star, and that even a tree is generating energy at thousands of times what the surface of a total star would. Take the weight of a star, how much energy does a star put out per unit of mass, compare that to a tree. Tree is 10,000 times or 1,000 times more energetic per pound per kilogram than a star, which is pretty amazing.
That's amazing. didn't know
And
that.
so essentially it's building structure to do that, right?
Hmm.
And the structures that dissipate more energy are therefore the ones that are favored.
Hmm. So that's a yes to my simple question.
Yes,
Simple answer.
sort of.
Sort of.
Yeah, it's like, is this built into the universe? What's that mean? Or is it, part of uh, what the universe does when you run it? I
Hmm.
tend to be more of an emergentist, so
Hmm.
I don't necessarily believe things are predetermined or fully deterministic, even. But
Hmm.
this increased complexity when you're in a far from equilibrium system uh, strikes me as something that is in the universe and something that does happen.
Hmm. What do you, if you think about the essence of what you would like to pass beyond your own life through the thinking, what is it that you would like people to be faster on, to shortcut on, right? So that they don't need decades to arrive at the same conclusion, but they can shortcut this. What are some of the most important steps that you would like people to hop over?
Of course, a lot of it's summed up in my Game B talks and writings, etc., uh,
Mm-hmm.
uh, which is essentially we have to move from everything based on competition and dominance, particularly using money as a weapon, to a world based on cooperation in a friendlier, more humane way that increases human well being while preserving our natural complexity and our ecosystem while leaving the door open to this grand journey out into the universe that I talked about earlier. And that people, come on, don't follow your nose through life and compete by, buying a Porsche or a 10,000 square foot, which would be 1,000 square meter house. Um, Not necessary. You know, Learn to think in a different way about what your role is in life, is to make life richer, make life better for yourself and for your community.
Mm-hmm. How many decades did it take you to arrive at that point?
Let's see. I think I started to make the turn in 1954. So, 1950. That doesn't make any sense. So yeah, I would have been like 40 or so, 42, 43, 42, I think.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And up until then, I was a classic game A player. I played the game, right? I played it in my own weird, idiosyncratic way because I didn't
Mm-hmm.
really give too much of a shit about the details and the signs and symbols, but I enjoyed playing the game hard, right? Because I
Mm-hmm.
sometimes called myself game A motherfucker, right? I was good at the game. Even against what I would consider somewhat evil people, I figure out ways to beat them, and not necessarily always nice ways to beat them. But it was, in the uh, the 19 anyway. Yeah, I was in my early 40s when I started saying, "Wait a minute, this is nuts, right? This does not work. This does not scale over time in a finite planet."
Mm-hmm. Um, so I have an issue with authority telling me something, so I need to experience things myself. What would you say is the fastest way? Just one step back. I think what you just said, every child understands. It gets lost maybe around puberty, and then it might be regained at a later point once you've had enough experiences that bring you back into that state, right? So there's a state that you arrive at on the other end of complexity, basically. And what would you propose is the fastest way to make all of the necessary mistakes that a person can make in order to learn what they need to learn in order to arrive there faster than 40.
I will say the way I made the change and opened my eyes was to find myself in the middle of a group of people who had already made the transition.
Hmm.
A group of people that were, they called themselves the sustainability group. And I met them online and I go, wow, they made me move a long way in a short period of time. So find people who have already made the transition and spend time with them, interact with them, compare their values to your values, compare their way of life to your way of life. I do believe that um, participating in the new way of thinking with other people is the only way, or at least it's the most accessible way to make that progress. I don't know if I'd ever made the progress. I didn't happen to stumble onto those people.
One of my heuristics is aligned with that, but only to a point, and then I fail. That heuristic is if the people around me agree too much with me, they're the wrong people. But
And of course,
but at
that was
one
fun. Go ahead.
Mhm.
Go ahead.
At one point, I might be in an equilibrium where it is actually a good sign that the people agree with me, or I agree with the people, whatever way around. So how do I determine that properly?
Yeah, that's a damn good question. That's a matter of, uh, it's subtle. It's a matter of deep discernment. Let me give you a
Mm,
sense. When I encountered these folks, I was a C-level executive at a $8 billion company, right? And my first reaction, who are these fucking hippies? They're a bunch of dreamy people. They don't know shit. They get eaten alive out there in the real world.
mm,
And so, yeah, they certainly were people I seemed like I disagreed with initially. But then as I continued to talk with them for like 6 months, I realized, whoa, these guys see something I don't see.
mm,
And what they see is, literally sustainability, that our current strategy just ain't going to work over time. Sorry, people. And so even though my initial reaction, a bunch of goddamn hippies, after a few months, I was like, those goddamn hippies are right. So there
mhm,
was a
mhm,
case of, strongly disagreeing with people. And I would say at the same time, of course, I hung out with a bunch of business dudes, right? And, I enjoyed them. We all told jokes and, play poker, what have you. But I can't say I learned anything particularly from them that I didn't already know, maybe a little business trick or two. But I couldn't feel the gradient of learning and change happening with a bunch of other C-level executives and
mhm,
founders of companies and what have you. It was like one of the reasons I moved away from the DC area to Santa Fe was just to get away from all that stuff. I called it the conventional wisdom. If you allow yourself to be saturated in the conventional wisdom all the time, it's also harder to make the turn towards the good.
mhm. So it's in a way it's the lived scientific method. You try to falsify your in-group as much as possible by interfacing with as much out-group as possible and see if they might be right about what they see and you might be wrong. So try to falsify your own worldview as much as you can.
Yeah, it's well said. Very, very well said. I like that as a way to simplify that idea. Though, of course, you have to use discernment and intelligence in what outgroups you become
Hmm.
involved with, because you could easily fall into some kind of nutty religious cult or
Mm,
conspiracy theorists, or So you also have to have your own worldview that uh, provides you signals about other groups as to whether they're likely to be useful and valuable and add to your worldview, or they're going to be destructive. And I will say this sustainability group, even though I seemed like I disagreed with their tenor, which is smaller economy, less footprint on the earth, etc. but they sent the right signals in terms of being good and honest people, being welcoming, not being censorious because you disagreed with them. They sent many good interpersonal signals, which
Hmm.
kept me in long enough to become convinced that their ideas were right.
Hmm.
If they had been doctrinaire, you know the kind who think that they're
Hmm.
right and that everybody disagrees with them's the devil. Um, that's going to drive anybody away who's on the edge of making the move but hasn't made it yet. And I think that's an
But
important thing to keep in mind is be open even to people you disagree with because they might convince you or you might convince them, and both are valuable. Both are valuable.
so a steep learning gradient, noticing a steep learning gradient, both in both directions, right? So that's an important prerequisite because that also prevents you from being sucked into culty cults.
Yep, yep. And I will say I've always been a person who likes to climb the gradient.
Mm.
Is there something going on here that the more you learn, the more you learn? Uh, and particularly gradients that are near the edge of what is known and what is kind of acceptable general thinking. Not a person that likes conformity, as you said, authority. Oh, I've always
Mm.
been
Mm.
terrible with authority, right?
Mm.
But yeah, anyway.
And it requires, I mean, okay, gradients uphill, then you're on top of the hill and you discover, oh shit, wrong hill, right? And you need to get down the hill again.
Yeah, I call it
So
valley crossing. One of the hardest things we do
exactly.
as humans. We get
Hmm.
to and by the way, the hill you're on top of may not be a bad hill on its own terms. It's uh, a local maxima, as we would say in
Hmm.
complexity theory. And then this is much harder. Very few people can do this, right? Which is to pop up and survey and say, all right, is there a higher hill that's reasonably accessible to me? And if so, let me figure out how to get there. And there's a whole bunch of tactical things there. Sometimes you can get from one global maxima to a bigger local maxima via following a ridge between the two, right? Other
Hmm. Hmm.
times, I call it the valley crossing, right? That you better be well supplied, have lots of resources to march through Death Valley to the higher ridge on the other side. And then the other last one, which is hardest, is the parachute attack. Basically just drop into the new higher ground. And this is where people quit their job in New York City and move to Big Sur or something, right? They just drop into a new environment and hope that it catches. So a lot of ways to move from your local maxima
Hmm.
to higher local maxima. Unlikely you'll find the global maxima, but it requires some understanding of that concept and some willingness to kind of pop up and look around.
Hmm. Look around and question what you see, question that worldview, right? So
And
essentially, saying
evaluate, have discernment.
evaluate, yeah,
There's an
and
awful lot of local
mm.
maximas that are no better than the one you're on, or worse. Right? Don't assume that change for its own sake is good.
Mm. And perspective, right? Imagine what your local maximum might look like from the other peaks. That's very, very helpful, right, for the discernment, because you will see a bunch of peaks around you. Which one do you choose to climb,
Yep.
and why?
Yep. Yeah,
Right?
that's a huge talent, and probably in relatively short supply. Most people are satisfied with the local maxima they're on.
Hmm.
Uh, and some of them don't even, in fact, many don't even realize there are other hills to be climbed. In fact, I used to
And
always tell my business people the tendency of an American corporation is to climb to the top of the hill that it's on and dig in. Uh,
from a cultural perspective, that makes a lot of sense, right? Culture needs some level of coherence. So if everybody's constantly valley crossing, then coherence becomes really, really hard. And so you need people sitting on hills that are somewhat stable. And then, unfortunately, most of the valley crossers seem to be dark triad types, right? Now, and they're moving ahead, doing the change, and then landing on higher grounds, and somehow find ways to exploit the rest.
Unfortunately,
So,
we see a lot of that in the technology world, right? Where, okay, something new is happening. I can do something interesting with that, and that's valley crossing of a sort. And then when I get there on the other side, I can exploit the hell out of that.
so what would light triad valley crossing look like?
Well, I think one of the big differences between dark and light is that it is a group effort rather than a
Hmm.
small number of charismatic individuals leading a bunch of passive followers, so that it is a live group that is organizing the valley crossing. I think
Hmm.
that's first and foremost, and that the ethos of the group it has an immune system against dominators.
Hmm.
And that's one of the things that we are losing, had lost a number, a long time ago, but it's getting worse all the time, is the valorization of dominators, right?
Hmm.
That someone like, these tech billionaires are considered honorable and respectable people in the world rather than, you know, pathological people. And sometimes they're both super talented and pathological, like Elon Musk. But our whole society since they say the 70s has changed to more and more valorization of individual characters, and frankly, we don't care much, at least socially, about their means.
Hmm.
Zuckerberg, for instance, right? Uh, Elon, good example. I mean, Bill Gates, Bill Gates, Microsoft in its later days became a predatory and relatively bad organization. Uh, so, I think you have to be careful that you don't include those people in leadership roles, at least in your group attempt to organize an expedition across the valley.
Yeah, and this is where you move move the biological analogy into the cultural, right? And talk about membranes of that group,
Yeah,
um, building the membranes. So,
and consciously building the accords or the rules
mhm,
of that
mhm, mhm,
membrane, and then the result being the currents, which is how does it feel to be in a membrane? Is doing the right thing rewarded, and
mhm,
or is it constantly fighting you? To try to do the right thing in game A, it's always fighting you. It's really hard, and so
mhm,
because we have the wrong agreements, wrong incentive structures, wrong status games. But if you're inside of a membrane where those things have been tuned specifically so that doing the right thing is going with the currents, then you're in a world that's less susceptible to dark triad dominance.
mhm. And there we are again, essentially, at the topic of the last 2 weeks ago conversation. Um, How is this so fucking hard to get into the right currents so that we can build this thing?
Absolutely. This is not easy, and most of the time it fails, but
Hmm.
sooner or later we'll get it right, hopefully.
We must.
We must, and we must. And we must find enough resources. And let's not be naive that we can do it just by good thinking. We also need the
Mm.
resources in the world to make it happen.
Mm.